Welcome everybody, and in this video you will learn how to properly build the Jaws pistol. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So, per usual tradition, let's take a look at the gun's features to understand how it works. So if we start off, it says that every 4 hits will trigger Unstable Bomber, which is its status damage, right? So it's special damage. Critical hits increase count by +1, so pretty much every time you crit, assume that you have 100% crit rate, every 2 hits will trigger Unstable Bomber instead of 4. Now, after defeating an enemy, blast damage plus 30% for 12 seconds, so this is another buff to your Unstable Bomber, and Unstable Bomber can deal critical hits, crit rate plus 25%, and this feature is the most important one, right? So pretty much what this means is that you will be building crit on this gun and not really elemental damage, right? And crit rate plus 25%. Now, reminder, this is not added to your normal crit rate. This is added to, if I can equip my gun here, this is added to your Unstable Bomber crit rate, right? So keep that in mind. And now, let's take a quick look at what Unstable Bomber is, right? So if we go take a look at the tooltip, it is status damage of your PSI intensity, so make sure to calibrate all of your armor to +6 so that you deal as much damage as possible. The additional damage is blast element, cannot crit, cannot strike weak spots, and will not decay with distance. And for this gun, well, it will be able to crit, right? And then the game gives us the damage formula, like a reduced version of the damage formula. So yeah, then let's take a look at our calibration attributes. So you essentially have two choices. So you have the choice to choose between rapid shot style and to choose between precision style. Rapid shot style will perform better in terms of damage, however you will have less recoil on precision and more range, right? Which can help you hit your shots when shooting long range. So this is pretty much the trade-off that you have to take. Oh, and rapid shot style gives you magazine capacity, which you will also need. And now, for your calibration substats, it's should be pretty simple, right? So if you don't run the crossbow, the recurve crossbow right here, that gives you crit rate. So hitting a weak spot will inflict the bullseye on the target, causing all weapons to have crit rate plus 30% versus target with bullseye, blah blah blah. All right, all that. If you are not gonna run the crossbow, go for double crit rate. If you will run the crossbow, double crit damage, right? So this is essentially how you want to separate your substats for your calibration. With that, let's go take a look at our gun's accessories, right? Which is pretty important for this weapon. And so for the muzzle, I will be running the, what is called the light break for the most amount of accuracy possible. So as you can see, all the other ones don't give as much accuracy, and the reason for that is because for this gun you probably don't want to shoot ADS, right? So you go for accuracy so that when you shoot OTS you have the most amount of accuracy possible. And the reason why you don't want to be shooting ADS is because, say the target is kind of far, if you shoot ADS, I can't even see where I'm shooting at, right? I can't even see where I'm shooting at, what I'm shooting at. So you're going to be shooting OTS, right, to at least like be able to see your targets. So this is the school of thought for this gun. If you take a look at the next accessory, ideally you are running the Compact Reflex Sight. However, I did not buy it from the Morphic shop, so I will be running the Mini Reflex Sight, right? And don't run the Light Reflex Sight, it reduces your stability, which, well, you might want, right? Now for the tactics, really straightforward, integrated laser sight. It gives you 19 accuracy. None of the other accessories give you that. For the magazine, just use the extended pistol mag. You're going to have more damage per mag. So now let's move on to the gear that you will want to use. Now really straightforward for the key gear. This gun, since it's like its elemental damage can crit, it is really similar to the corrosion shotgun, if you haven't noticed, right? The difference is that this one is unstable bomber, whereas corrosion shotgun is shock, right? Power surge. And their key gear actually gives the exact same effect. So after triggering, well, the unstable bomber or power surge, crit rate plus 35% for 3 seconds, right? But for this gun, you will be using this because it gives you the 35% crit rate that you need, and also it'll offer you 17.5% unstable bomber bonus damage due to a gun mod that I will talk about later. Now, for your gear piece bonuses, right, your normal gear, run the 4-piece Lone Wolf, it's going to give you the crit that you need. And then for the last piece, go for anything that will give you a 1-piece bonus, right, for either your damage or whatever, right? So if you don't have Bastille like I'm running right now, you could definitely run for, say, I believe it's Renegade, which gives you reload speed. Do I have it? Yes. So Renegade reload speed plus 15% right here. But yeah, this is the setup that I'll be running. Otherwise, you can definitely consider well, as I've said, 3-piece Lone Wolf, right? So you still want the stacking crit damage buff. However, you can run it with 2-piece Savior right here, which when your HP is above 70%, weapon and status damage plus 10%, right? So it'll buff both your normal bullets damage and also your unstable bomber damage. Or if you don't have Savior, you can also opt for Falcon, because the 2-piece Falcon gives you crit damage, which benefits both your UB and your normal bullets damage, right? So yeah. However, do keep in mind that since Falcon set is purple, it'll give you less PSI intensity than the legendary armor. So do know that you will lose damage with the Falcon jacket, well, Falcon set, whatever. Right now, let's move on to the secondary weapons real quick. So for the secondary weapon, you have 3 choices essentially. You have the recurve crossbow, you have the bingo, right, the bullseye sniper, and you also have the wildfire. Now the key differences are that if you run the recurve crossbow, like I said for the calibrations, no need to go for double crit rate. However, if you run the wildfire and the bingo, right, you will need to go double crit rate as your Cali, right? But preferably, like say if you're doing PvP, don't go with the recurve crossbow. You'll probably want the bingo for more range, right? Like this, you can use your jaws to fight close range, and then use your bingo to fight long range, right? But then if you use wildfire, it's still fine, right? You know, like you still get some bullseye effect. You can transfer bullseye effect as well. However, you won't benefit from the last buff, because the last buff disappears when you swap weapons, right? So this is it for the secondary weapons. Now for the melee, I use the long axe for the 5 seconds fortress warfare that it can give me, and also if I hit enemies with my heavy attack, I'll also get crit rate, right? So 10% crit rate, which is quite a lot. This stacks up to 5 stacks, and it's 10% per enemy. So say here I have 3 dummies, I heavy attack once. As you can see, I've gotten 3 stacks at the bottom side of my screen, a bit to the left of my HP bar. And if I just look at my gear, if I look at my buffs right here, as you can see, crit rate and melee speed are increased. So yeah, this is it for your secondary and melee weapons. And now let's dive into mods, which is the most important part, arguably. So now let's move on to your substats priority. So your best in slot is crit damage as suffix stat. Then you'd want the weapon damage and status damage for the rest of the substats. Elemental as suffix stat works too, but not as well as crit damage, right? And then magazine capacity is good, and reload speed is meh. I'd rather go for more damage myself, right? So that's pretty much it for your substats. Oh, and by the way, if you have any questions, feel free to leave in the comments. I'll be happy to answer them when I see them. Now, before we dive into mods, I'm going to say this now, that what I say isn't absolute, and the reason for that is because the substats from your mods can impact your gun's performance by a lot and make them better than the actual best in slots. So for instance, you could have a mod that is not the best in slot, however, because of its substats, it is now the best in slot for you, right? So with that in mind, let's go over to our gun mod. So for your gun mod, you essentially have 2 choices, right? You have the choice between Reckless Bomber and Bombardier Souvenir. The reason we're not going to consider Supercharged is because it's a worse Reckless Bomber, right? Since you'll be stacking so much crit rate on this gun, say for instance, you have 70% crit rate, right? So if we just read the description real quick, it says that for every 1% crit rate, unstable bomber damage plus 0.5%. Right, so if we have 70% crit rate, what that means is we have half of it as UB bonus damage. So we got pretty much 35% unstable bomber damage. And if we take a look at Supercharged, triggering Unstable Bomber grants Unstable Bomber damage plus 5% for 3 seconds, and the effect can stack up to 6 times. This thing, right, literally you have to stack it, and even when fully stacked, does not beat the 35% that we have, which comes from the 70% crit rate that is pretty easy to achieve with this gun, right? So Reckless Bomber is going to be your first option, and then you can also choose Bombardier Souvenir, which pretty much when triggering Unstable Bomber automatically refill 10% of your magazine. Now, pretty much, Reckless, it gives you way more damage per shot, but you have to reload. Whereas Souvenir, you'll lose a lot of damage. However, you won't need to reload as much as long as you hit your shots and crit, right? So for instance, if your deagle, if your deagle, well technically, yeah, it is a deagle, but if your Jaws has 20 bullets, right? What this essentially means, that if you have 100% crit rate and you crit every single time, right? 100% crit rate, crit every single time, you will crit every 2 shots, and 10% of 20 bullets from your magazine, that's gonna be 2 bullets. So every time you shoot 2 bullets, it's gonna refill 2 bullets, right? So you can just keep refilling your gun. However, you won't be able to keep 100% crit rate permanently. So you will, at one point, you're gonna drain out of bullets, right? You're gonna go out of bullets, so you have to reload. But yeah, Reckless Bomber is better just because of the pure damage output that you can do with it, and also the fact that if you overcap on crit rate, right? So for instance, you're not lucky, you can't get yourself double crit damage substats from your calibration, right? So you go over the 100% crit rate, it will still benefit your damage a little bit, since every 1% crit rate that overflows anyway is converted into 0.5% UB damage, right? So this is why Reckless Bomber is pretty much going to be my preferred option. Now, let's move on to the helmet. So for the helmet, you essentially have 4 different choices, right? You can pick between Deviation Expert, the Fateful Strike, Momentum Up, and Elemental Havoc. Now I'm going to put this right here. Elemental Havoc is the weakest, right, out of these 4. And then for Fateful Strike, the special thing with Fateful Strike is, well, if you have Momentum Up or Deviation Expert and there is no weak spot to hit, or you're just straight up not able to hit the weak spots, right, Fateful Strike will perform better. But however, if you cannot hit the weak spots, these 2 will smoke Fateful Strike. Now, it's going to be between Momentum Up and Deviation Expert. The thing is, these 2 perform similarly in single target scenarios. However, Dev Expert has more AoE damage than Momentum Up. So that is it for your helmet mods. Now, let's move on to the mask. So for your mask, you kind of have 3 options, and that's going to depend on whether if you do run the long axe or one of the secondary weapons that I showed you that gives the bullseye effect, right? So first option would be this one right here, Point Detonation. When Unstable Bomber hits only one enemy, Unstable Bomber final damage plus 25%. And it kind of looks bad because it makes it so that you can only shoot at single targets, right? But the thing about Unstable Bomber is that the explosion range is kind of small, so most of the time, even if you're dealing against AoE enemies, in any case, the Unstable Bomber might just straight up not even hit them in an AoE, right? So you'll be fine and you'll get that 25% damage bonus, right? And then for your second option, second and third option, you can choose Targeted Strike, right? Which is going to help you, if you run the Crossbow, Bingo, or Wildfire, right? Because when hitting marked enemies, crit rate plus 10%, and crit damage plus 25%. So already it gives you 10% crit damage, 10% crit rate, and 25% crit damage. But not only that, because of the 10% crit rate, you also gain 5% UB damage. And then just for Fortress Warfare, really, you'd run a Fortress Warfare mod if you really don't have any of the, these 2 that I've talked about, right? So let's move on to gloves. Now for the gloves, you have 2 choices pretty much. Essentially, it's gonna be the two crit mods, right? So Crit Amp, which gives you 35% crit ratio, 35 crit ratio, and you'll have Crit Boost, which gives you a 30 crit ratio, and pretty much just without considering substats, Crit Amp rules over Crit Boost. Well, if we just put it in simple perspective, Crit Amp with 35% crit ratio and with the 5% UB bonus that it gives, when you do when you multiply them together, that pretty much gives you a 1.42 multiplier when rounded up. And for crit boost, you have 30% crit ratio and 7.5 UB damage bonus. And when you multiply these up, that gives you, like, when rounded up, 1.4 multiplier. So crit amp is better than your crit boost, right? But really, if you, since like in the actual game, you'll have to consider substats. Really, just you'll have to do some testing, right, with those two. Otherwise, the rest are not really that much worth taking a look at if you have crit, right? Really, just go for crit amp or crit boost. Now, for your shoes, it's gonna be covered advance. It's really like for every gun that I've tested on my channel, right, and for like some of the guns that I've played myself with, covered advance just rules over all of the other shoe mods, right? So just run covered advance. Now, for the top, you essentially have three options, right? So you have munitions amplifier, you have flame resonance, and crit damage enhancement. And with that, what I recommend you to do is, this one is heavily dependent on the quality of your substats, right? Because for these mods, what can happen is either they drop the mods as blue green or even blue, and they sometimes drop the mod as gray substats, right? So really, it's very dependent on your substats. So you have to do some testing with the ones that you currently have. But for me, currently, munitions amplifier is going to be the best one when I shoot at a dummy. Moving on to the last piece of gear with mods, that's going to be your pants. And for the pants, it's going to be Deadshot, right? So each crit hit by non-melee weapons grants plus 5% crit damage up to 45%. The effect is removed upon the next reload. Now, this is essentially pretty much your only option. You can go for Bullet Siphon if, well, you pair it either with Ruthless Reaper, right, the shoe mod. However, if I can just, actually, before I move on, if I can just show it. Do I have it? Yeah, I have it. So Ruthless Reaper, right? After getting 2 kills, refill 100% of your magazines from your reserve. However, if you do that, you will lose a Cradle buff that I will talk about later. But essentially, also, if you run Bullet Siphon, you can definitely consider running the gun mod that I've talked about earlier. Which, okay, oh, this is Bullseye. Alright, you can definitely run Bombardier Souvenir, right? Because the thing is, for Bullet Siphon, it's pretty much the buff is that weapon damage plus 5%, and every 5 bullets consumed in the magazine grants plus 4% weapon damage, capped at 20%. Now your average Jaws ammo mag capacity is gonna sit around, like, I don't know, 20. So already, like, you wouldn't be able to stack it that much if you run Bullet Siphon without all of the other complementary mods, right? Which essentially just in the end makes you lose damage. So that's gonna be it for the pants mod, and let's go over to the Cradle. Let's talk about the Cradle buff that I was talking about that you will lose if you run the previous mod combination that I was talking about, right? Which is this first round blast. So after reloading, instant damage plus 25% for 4 seconds. And the reason why you lose this Cradle, if pretty much, is because with the mods that you'll be running that I've talked about, you literally won't need to reload. So you lose this buff, right? So yeah, but let's talk about the other essential Cradles. So handgun enhancement is mandatory. Damage plus 25%, plus 20% when holding pistols or shotgun. Reload 1 ammo from reserve upon defeating an enemy. And then for these ones, Deviation Master is mandatory essentially for PvE content. Master Tactician, you'd use this when you fight against great ones, right? So after throwing tactical items, which tactical item, be it a grenade or a dagger, right? Damage against the great ones plus 25% for 15 seconds. Tactical combo, definitely use that, right? And status enhancement, after hitting a weak spot, status damage plus 25%. This is essential for your UB damage. And steady hands is well, if you run the bingo, or actually, you know what, any weapon that can mark enemies, right, you will get this buff, right? And or also, like, if you're gonna be running the long axe, you'll also be able to benefit from the 40% weak spot damage. Now I run bounty hunter as well, since I run the crossbow, right? So every time I defeat a unit that I myself marked, I'll get 25% weapon damage and weak spot damage plus 35%. So this pretty much wraps it up for your Cradle buffs. Now, let's move on to the foods that you can have. So let's start with the drinks. Really straightforward. Your only option is Whimsical Drink, used to gain 25% status damage bonus. This is absolutely great, right? It'll buff your unstable bomber damage. Stardust Raspberry, you don't even consider that because the unstable bomber isn't a continuous debuff. Let's take a look at the food buffs. Really, there's not a specific food that's gonna buff unstable bombers, so you're really free to pick like any of the options, right? So for instance, French fries used to increase weapon damage by 20% while in Fortress Warfare, given by either a teammate that you're going to be, well, if you run something with your teammate and your teammate can activate Fortress Warfare, you can use that. For instance, Shattered Bread would be good, used to increase all weapon damage by 25%. Stargazy Pie, crit plus 25% crit damage when your energy is full. What else is there? Weak spot damage, right, for your normal bullet damage. Bone and deviated sausage for a boss, right? So you have a lot of options here to pick from. Actually, I can see two more. Mixed fried hot dogs, so 20% more damage against enemies affected by bullseye. And the shellfish meat, which grants vulnerability plus 5% on the target for 10 seconds every time you hit a certain enemy. So yeah, these are going to be your food buffs that you can run with. Now, there is a deviation that you can pick to increase your UV damage, and it's going to be the Shattered Maiden. So if we just read its auto attack description, autonomously moves and attacks, inflicts slowdown and change to non-boss enemies in front when attacking, also increasing their explosion damage received by 50%. So this buff will work against elites and will also work against normal enemies, so you could definitely run the Shattered Maiden to buff your damage. With that, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel. I greatly appreciate the support, and I'll see you in the next guide. Take care!